So, the concept of a Mount Rushmore of anything has become a pretty popular online thing. People picking their top four whatever they love most, whether it's World Series championship teams or breakfast cereals or college football mascots or whatever else. It's basically about the four things you would immortalize in stone. Naturally, the film world has its own version of this, the filmmaker Mount Rushmore, and I thought it'd be fun to try my hand at it, to figure out which four filmmakers mean the most to me, the ones whose work I would build a monument to if I could. But this took a lot of soul searching. I had to ask myself which filmmakers have a body of work that's consistently worth celebrating, not just one or two great films, but an entire filmography that shaped the way that I watch and think about movies. For example, my favorite film of all time, which you would all know if you watch this channel, is The Fall, directed by Tarsem Singh. It's a true masterpiece, completely singular, visually stunning, emotionally overwhelming. But as much as I love The Fall, I can't really say the rest of Tarsem's filmography holds up to the same level. So he's not someone I could justifiably put on my Mount Rushmore. In this video, I'm going to go through four filmmakers who have had the most meaningful and lasting impact on me, on my love of cinema, and how I approach filmmaking myself. But first, we got to go through some honorable mentions. First up, David Fincher. He's undeniably one of the greats of the last 30 years, from Seven and Fight Club to Zodiac and Gone Girl. Fincher defined a generation of thrillers and psychological dramas with his meticulous style and precision. His more recent work like Mank and The Killer proves he's still operating at the top of his game, but as much as I love his work, he just misses the cut for my Mount Rushmore. Up next is Martin Scorsese. What can you really say about Scorsese that hasn't already been said? He's one of the most influential filmmakers to ever live. My first encounter with his work was The Departed, and that movie blew my mind. From there, I went back and discovered Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, After Hours, and he's continued to evolve with films like Silence, The Irishman, and Killers of the Flower Moon. The man is still operating at full speed, well into his 80s. He's a titan, plain and simple, but not quite one of my final four. And I also want to mention Juzo Itami. He's a more recent discovery for me, but one who's had a huge impact. Itami made 10 films in his lifetime. You may know some of them, like Tampopo, A Taxing Woman, Supermarket Woman, The Funeral, and every single one is sharp, funny, and full of life. I actually made a full video about him on this channel because I think he deserves so much more recognition than he actually gets. He started directing later in life, but the 10 films that he made feel like 10 distinct masterworks. If you've seen and loved Tampopo, just know it's probably my third or fourth favorite Itami film, which should tell you how good the rest are. I couldn't quite put him on my Mount Rushmore since he's a newer influence for me, but his work is something I know I'll be coming back to for the rest of my life. And just so we could speed things along, there are some others that I want to name here. Danny Boyle, Steven Spielberg, Quentin Tarantino, Edgar Wright, Christopher Nolan, for example. None of these fine old men have made the cut for me. So without further ado, let's just kick off my official Mount Rushmore. Let's start off with a big one, the most expected name on my or any Mount Rushmore of filmmakers, Paul Thomas Anderson. With his new film, One Battle After Another, recently released, he's been on everyone's minds again, and rightfully so. The man has been long overdue for recognition from the Academy, but honestly, his work speaks for itself. I first discovered Paul Thomas Anderson when There Will Be Blood came out and everyone was talking about it, and it completely floored me. I was a teenager and I remember thinking, what is this? Who is this guy? It just hit me kind of like a tidal wave. And after that, I had to go backwards and I discovered Boogie Nights, Magnolia, Punch Drunk Love, and Hard Eight. And I remember being stunned that all of these films came from the same guy. The tone, the pacing, the worlds, they were all so different, yet the same creative energy pulsed through every frame. And then came The Master, and that one changed everything for me. I vividly remember taking my mom to see it when I was in theaters. She didn't know anything about Paul Thomas Anderson or what to expect, and I remember walking out absolutely shell-shocked. I had never seen acting like that on screen before. Joaquin Phoenix and Philip Seymour Hoffman give these raw, spiritual, almost alien performances. It was the first time I realized that movies could feel that alive, that psychologically charged. And since then, he never stopped evolving. Inherent Vice, Phantom Thread, Licorice Pizza, and now One Battle After Another. Each one feels like a new phase, a new language he's inventing as he goes. He's inspired an entire generation of filmmakers. You even see people like Zach Kreger, who just released Weapons this year, citing him as a direct influence. He's one of those rare directors you just have to bring up when you talk about great filmmaking, period. What makes him so special is that his films are always alive with character, whether it's the toxic drive of Daniel Plainview, the lost humanity of Freddie Quell, or the chaotic warmth of the entire Boogie Nights ensemble. Anderson knows how to capture people at their most complicated and human. Daniel Day-Lewis's performance in There Will Be Blood might be the greatest performance of all time, but you don't get that without Paul Thomas Anderson's guiding hand. And what's fascinating is how his style has shifted. Early on, you could feel the Scorsese influence, the fast cutting, the sweeping camera moves, the overlapping dialogue. And then with There Will Be Blood and The Master, he slows down. The films become more deliberate, more meditative, these micro epics about obsession, control, and connection. And then he zags again with Licorice Pizza and One Battle After Another, finding a lighter, looser tone that still carries all of the emotional density of his earlier work. Paul Thomas Anderson is a filmmaker who refuses to repeat himself, who keeps reinterpreting what cinema can do. Watching his evolution has been like watching the medium itself evolve in real time, and that's why he belongs on my Mount Rushmore. Up next is a filmmaker with one of the most sprawling, fascinating filmographies out there, some of the greatest movies ever made, some that are a little uneven, but every single one filled with heart, humor, and philosophy. I'm talking, of course, about Richard Linklater. Trying to pinpoint the first Richard Linklater film I ever saw is a bit tough. If I'm being honest, when I was a kid, it was probably School of Rock or Bad News Bears, movies I didn't even realize were his at the time. But the real turning point came when I saw Waking Life. My high school philosophy teacher showed it to us in class, and if you've seen it, you know exactly why. It's basically a cinematic dream journal about existence, consciousness, and what it means to live. Waking Life completely melted my brain. The rotoscoped animation, the drifting, dreamlike structure, it was like nothing I had ever seen before. I went home that same day, I found it online, and I rewatched it immediately. I needed to know who made something that felt so personal and profound, and that's how I fell in love with the wide, wonderful world of Richard Linklater. From there, I went all the way back to Slacker, the film that helped kick off the American indie boom of the early 90s. It's a movie that doesn't follow a traditional plot, it just floats from one conversation to another, but it ended up inspiring a whole generation of filmmakers. Kevin Smith has even said that it's the reason he made Clerks. And then, of course, there's the Before trilogy, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight, movies that taught me more about love and relationships than most real-life experiences. Watching those films as I got older felt like growing up alongside Jesse and Celine, learning how messy, painful, and beautiful love can be. In fact, just a few months ago, my girlfriend and I did an entire rewatch of all three of those movies, and it was a profound experience. They're the kind of movies that I feel like I want to watch every decade. And you can't talk about Linklater without mentioning Dazed and Confused, one of the most effortlessly rewatchable films of all time, or Boyhood, which genuinely changed how I think about what movies can be. When Boyhood came out in 2014, I had just graduated high school, the same age as Mason in the movie, and it felt like it was made for me. Watching those 12 years unfold was like watching my own life reflected back through film. Linklater's career has always been about experimentation. He's never afraid to try something new, from rotoscoping again in A Scanner Darkly and Apollo 10.5, to his recent collaboration with Glenn Powell on Hitman, to the two films he has out this year, Blue Moon and Nouvelle Vague. And he's even in production on Merrily We Roll Along, a musical that he plans to shoot over the course of 20 years in real time. I just hope we could all live long enough to see it. People often say Linklater makes the mundane profound, but I think it's more than that. He finds the extraordinary within the everyday, those fleeting in-between moments that actually define who we are, whether it's high school nostalgia, late night conversations, or growing up one year at a time. His films always feel alive and human and deeply curious. What's so special about Linklater is that his films seem to move at the same rhythm as life itself. There's never any rush to get to a plot point or a big emotional climax. The emotion comes naturally out of the flow of experience. His movies have this gentle patience, this willingness to let people just be in front of a camera. And that's such a rare thing. You start to realize that what he's capturing isn't just story, but time passing, the way relationships evolve, or how our ideals change, how we quietly become different people without even noticing. Watching his work sometimes feels like flipping through an old photo album of your own life, even when the story has nothing to do with you. He may not hit the home run every time, films like The Newton Boys or Bad News Bears or Last Flag Flying, but he's one of the most honest, reflective filmmakers alive. Someone who keeps finding poetry in the ordinary, and for that, I'll always love Richard Linklater. Okay, this next filmmaker on my Mount Rushmore might seem like a bit of a curveball, but if you followed my YouTube channel for any length of time, this name won't surprise you at all. I'm talking, of course, about Bob Fosse. Now, look, I know, on paper, it's kind of a strange pick. I mean, when you think of guys like David Fincher or Martin Scorsese or Juzo Itami or Quentin Tarantino, all of whom I've already mentioned as honorable mentions in this video, they've got decades-long careers and sprawling filmographies. Fosse, by contrast, only made 5 films in his lifetime. But here's the thing. I would say that 3 out of those 5 are, to me, genuine all-timers, movies that stand shoulder to shoulder with the very best ever made. And the other 2, they're still remarkably solid entries, even in genres I don't normally gravitate toward. So if we're talking batting average, Fosse is hitting 1,000. Most people, of course, know Bob Fosse first and foremost as a choreographer, a titan of Broadway, a man whose name is practically synonymous with angular movements, bowler hats, finger snaps, and jazz hands. His fingerprints are all over mid-century musical theater, and I'll admit I'm not nearly well-versed enough in the world of choreography to unpack the full impact he had there. But what I do understand, and what's instantly visible the moment you put on Cabaret, is how Fosse reinvented the cinematic musical. He stripped it of its glossy artifice and injected it with grit, cynicism, and emotional truth. Even before Cabaret, his debut, Sweet Charity, hinted at something new, something restless beneath the shiny surface of the traditional movie musical. Watch Sweet Charity next to a film like What a Way to Go, another Shirley MacLaine vehicle from just a few years earlier, and the difference feels seismic. Sweet Charity already moves to a different rhythm. There's a nervous energy to it, a kinetic pulse that would come roaring to life in Cabaret. And Cabaret, man, what a film. It's the one that broke the mold open, redefining what a musical could be about and how it could look. It's set in Germany, but it might as well be set in any crumbling society, staring down at its own reflection. Watching it today, in America, in 2025, it feels disturbingly current. Maybe more relevant than ever. And then there's Lenny and All That Jazz, the twin peaks of Fosse's filmmaking career, in my opinion. Lenny was my introduction to Fosse, and even before I knew who Lenny Bruce was, I was hypnotized by this film's raw energy and moral complexity. Later, I came to understand just how personal that film was for Fosse, how much he saw himself in Lenny Bruce's defiance, his self-destruction, his art as exorcism, and All That Jazz is where that self-portrait becomes explicit. It's Fosse staring in the mirror, gasping for breath, confronting his own mortality and ambition through Roy Scheider's unforgettable performance. Fosse's cinema feels like the inside of an artist's nervous system. It's feverish, it's self-aware, it's rhythmic, but always human. He's a tragic figure, yeah, but also a deeply empathetic one. His work pulses with both cynicism and compassion, a combination that I find endlessly compelling. And even though his filmography is small, his influence reverberates in people like Scorsese, in people like Paul Thomas Anderson, in every filmmaker who treats editing like choreography. Now, what makes his story even more heartbreaking is how much he longed to be a star himself. Bob Fosse wanted to be in front of the camera. He wanted to perform. He wanted the applause. But people told him he didn't have the face for it, that he wasn't leading man material, that he was better off behind the curtain. And so, in true Fosse fashion, he took that rejection and he turned it into brilliance. If he couldn't be the star, he would make himself indispensable to the stars. He would shape the rhythm, the light, and in doing so, he became larger than any of them. His artistry became the performance. And yet, underneath all that mastery, there's always this ache, this sense of a man trying to outrun his own insecurities and mortality. You see it in All That Jazz, in the cigarettes and the pills and the endless rehearsals. He knew his body was breaking down, but he couldn't stop. He was addicted to the show, to the work, to the applause that he never quite got enough of. And that's what makes his death feel so devastating. Bob Fosse was taken far too soon, and you can't help but wonder what he still had left in him, what stories he might have told if he had had even one more decade. To me, that is one of the greatest what-ifs of cinema. Because when you watch All That Jazz, a film from 1979 that still feels more alive, more modern, more formally daring than most things that come out today, you realize that Fosse was still evolving. He was still experimenting, and we never got to see the next phase of that evolution. And that, in its own way, is both the tragedy and the beauty of Bob Fosse. Also, throughout that whole thing, I didn't even mention Star 80, his final film. Go check it out if you want to see an absolutely nauseating Eric Roberts performance, and I mean nauseating in a positive way. And so here we are. Last but not least, we arrive at the final face, or faces on my Mount Rushmore of filmmakers. Hint, hint. And maybe this one feels like cheating because technically it's two faces. Anyone who's been paying attention probably already guessed who I'm talking about. I am, of course, talking about Joel and Ethan Coen, the Coen brothers. Where do you even start with these guys? In my opinion, they're two of the greatest creative minds cinema has had to offer in the last 40 years. What's so striking about their work is how they transcend genre while always remaining distinctly themselves. Every film feels different, but every film also feels unmistakably Coen's. They're masters at blending philosophy and absurdity, humor and horror, chaos and order, and doing it all with such precision that their movies never feel showy or stale or self-indulgent. They're the perfect intersection of story, character, humor, entertainment, and technical craft. Let's start from the beginning with Blood Simple, their debut. You put that next to Miller's Crossing, Fargo, True Grit, or No Country for Old Men, and you've got a run of crime films that each feel entirely their own, infused with dry wit, irony, and this haunting sense of inevitability. No Country for Old Men, in particular, is one of my favorite films of all time. It's pure technical mastery. Roger Deakins' cinematography, that chilling sound design, the pacing, the restraint, all in service of a story about fate, cruelty, and the randomness of evil. And yet, even in their darkest films, there's always an undercurrent of humor, of humanity, of people stumbling through a world they can't fully understand. But then, on the other side of their filmography, you've got some of the funniest and most quotable comedies of the last few decades. Raising Arizona, The Big Lebowski, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Burn After Reading, Hail Caesar, even something like The Hudsucker Proxy, a loving homage to the screwball comedies of Howard Hawks and Preston Sturges, show just how well they understand cinematic language. They're constantly remixing the DNA of classic Hollywood through their own strange, modern philosophical lens. And the characters. The dude has basically become a cultural archetype. Anton Chigurh, who, yes, originated from Cormac McCarthy's novel, has become one of the defining villains of modern cinema. Even their smaller characters like Larry Gopnik in A Serious Man or Ed Crane in The Man Who Wasn't There feel mythic in their ordinariness. For me, A Serious Man might actually be my favorite Coen Brothers films. It's the perfect distillation of everything they do well. It's hilarious, it's bleak, it's philosophical, and deeply human. Michael Stuhlbarg gives one of the most underrated performances of the century, and Roger Deakins' cinematography deserves an Oscar nomination for the way that it captures the claustrophobic, cosmic absurdity. The film wrestles with faith, futility, and meaning in a way that's funny one moment and existentially horrifying the next. It's their most deceptively profound work, and it's one that I return to constantly when I'm looking for inspiration. And the thing about the Coens is that even their so-called lesser films like Intolerable Cruelty or The Lady Killers are still far more interesting than most filmmakers' best efforts. They can make The Man Who Wasn't There this slow, beautiful 1950s noir about a barber caught in moral quicksand, and then pivot to Burn After Reading, a farce about stupidity and espionage. That range, that fearlessness, that total command of tone, it's something I really admire. Whenever I'm writing, no matter what kind of project it is, I find myself thinking about the Coen brothers. If it's something serious, I'll look to Miller's Crossing, No Country, or Inside Llewyn Davis. If it's something more absurd, I'll throw on Lebowski or Raising Arizona. They have a film for every season, every mood, and the way they collaborate with cinematographers like Barry Sonnenfeld and Roger Deakins, or with Carter Burwell on the score, just shows how cohesive and intentional their vision really is. The Coens are proof that you can balance intelligence and entertainment, that you can be philosophical without being pretentious, and that great art doesn't need to choose between comedy and tragedy. That's why they're on my Mount Rushmore, not just because I love their films, but because their work constantly reminds me how limitless cinema could be. And there we have it, my Mount Rushmore of filmmakers. The fascinating thing about film history and film studies is that these kinds of lists are never static. They evolve as we do. 10 years from now, I might come back and have a completely different Mount Rushmore filled with filmmakers who haven't even made their best work yet. But right now, at this particular moment in my life, 29 years old, still constantly learning and rewatching and discovering, these are the filmmakers who mean the most to me. These are the ones whose work I imagine I'll be returning to for the rest of my life. And of course, there's a whole new generation of filmmakers doing extraordinary work. People like Sean Baker or Damien Chazelle or Robert Eggers, whose films over the past decade or so have really shaped the modern landscape and inspired me in my own creative journey. At the same time, I'm still discovering old masters, filmmakers like Henri-Georges Clouzot or Billy Wilder, whose work feels timeless and endlessly rewarding to dive into. Just this year, I discovered Juzo Itami, and that was a revelation, the kind of discovery that reminds you how much there still is out there, how many incredible filmmakers, entire filmographies even, are just waiting to be discovered. It makes the act of watching movies feel infinite. But anyway, this is my Mount Rushmore: Paul Thomas Anderson, Richard Linklater, Bob Fosse, and the Coen brothers. Let me know down in the comments who's on your Mount Rushmore filmmakers. Which 4 directors would you carve into a cinematic mountain if you could? And as always, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on the channel. Go follow me on Letterboxd so you can see what I'm watching, when I'm watching it, and I'll see you all next time.